Right now, we turn to policy and politics and why Congress is so frequently wasting its time with lies. Now, this story has a few parts, but we begin with something so stupid that we haven't previously covered it at all on The Beat. A rookie member of Congress made a false accusation with no evidence against some of his fellow Republicans. And it's not his first lie. It's a congressman who lied about Trump losing the election and talked up an armed resistance with bloodshed. Then this Republican lied about, apparently, his own Republican leaders, accusing them of holding cocaine orgies. He offered no evidence. What you are about to hear from this Republican is baseless. We're reporting on the political dynamic, not suggesting any credibility to what you will hear right now from freshman congressman and embarrassing fabulist Madison Cawthorn.
Then all of a sudden you get invited to, like, well, hey, we're going to have kind of a sexual get-together at one of our homes. You should come. And I'm like, what did you just ask me to come to? Yeah. And then you realize they're asking you to come to an orgy. And then you watch them do, a key bump of cocaine right in front of you.
Cawthorn had no evidence that Republicans or members of Congress did anything right in front of them. Top Republican Kevin McCarthy said Cawthorn lost his trust completely and says fellow members were, quote, very upset. Well, those Republicans are understandably upset. Who would appreciate being falsely accused of any sexual deviance or support for criminal conduct? Well, that's the exact line of attack several Republicans used against Judge Jackson at those confirmation hearings. She had issued standard typical sentences for convicts, but they made a non sequitur leap to suggest that she somehow empathized with sex offenders, which was false. Just like Cawthorn's leap that Republicans he differed with were leading some sort of D.C. cocaine orgy, which is false. So how did this young Republican get this way? Well, political analysts note that while Cawthorn is wrong and he should be held accountable, he's also part of this new generation of QAnon Republicans, raised on a steady diet of divisive, demeaning political crap. Cawthorn was 15 years old when Trump espoused birtherism, and 13 when Sarah Palin claimed Obama pals around with terrorists, notes analyst Che Komanduri. If the GOP is upset by his lies, harassment, and conduct, they need to look in the mirror and admit they made him this way. At 26, Cawthorn is the youngest member of Congress. He recently admitted that tirade was false, and he then cited his own age and maturity, or immaturity, as reasons to give him a break. And in history, some of the youngest people elected go on to bright careers. He could rebound and change. He could fizzle out. There are Republicans now working to try to defeat Cawthorn, to kick him out of their party, but not because he lied, just because he lied about Republicans. His youth is striking because it may offer a preview of this party's future, which is dangerous to these Republican leaders, as they clearly realize, as well as to fact-based governing in general. In fact, there's a new count out that finds dozens of QAnon candidates running for office in about half the country. And that could be a floor, not a ceiling. One of the early Republicans in this type of mold, Sarah Palin, who endorsed Trump back when he had no Republican help, is now back in the mix. She's running for Congress right now as well. Now, that's in case you forgot about her, but she and Trump led the party away from facts, away from policy, towards just fixating on content, entertainment, lies, and a kind of oblivious lifestyle where they know very little or nothing, kind of hearkening back to the 19th century anti-immigrant know-nothing party. Palin and Trump initially struggled to even publicly prove that they read things, and that turned out to be a selling point for many of their fans.
What newspapers and magazines did you regularly read before you were tapped for this to stay informed and to understand the world?
I've read most of them, again, with a great appreciation for the press, for the media.
But like what one specifically, I'm curious that you...
all of them, any of them that have been in front of me over all these years. I have a vast variety of sources.
Who are your favorite authors?
Well, I have a number of favorite authors. I think Tom Wolfe is excellent.
Did you read Vanity of the Bonfires?
I did not.
What book are you reading now?
Yeah. Well, I'm reading
Bonfire of the Vanities.
I'm reading my own book again because I think it's so fantastic, Tom.
What's the best book you've read beside Art of the Deal?
I really like Tom Wolfe's last book.
Which book?
His current book. His current book. It's just out.
Bonfire of the Vanities.
Yes.
That was the book he just said he hadn't read. Those are the type of political role models that Madison Cawthorn grew up with. It's a long ways from John McCain looking up to Eisenhower, or Democratic presidents who have often cited the example of learned and thoughtful leaders.
This is where I met President Kennedy back in July of 1963, and he was standing here where I'm standing now. Well, it had a very profound impact on me. I think that, it's something that I carried with me always.
I am one of the countless millions who drew inspiration from Nelson Mandela's life. I would study his words and his writings. The day he was released from prison gave me a sense of what human beings can do when they're guided by their hopes and not by their fears.
Obama would continue to tout and honor Mandela when they did eventually meet in person, kind of a full circle moment of leadership that is not even possible for Cawthorn or these QAnon politicians, because their supposed political inspirations do not exist. They will never meet up with Q, the supposed deep state insider, because Q is not real. It's a conspiracy theory. It's been debunked. That meeting is as probable as Cawthorn meeting up with Muppets or unicorns as if they are real. But Muppets and unicorns are not real. It might even be funny if the consequences weren't so serious. Much of the next generation of Republicans, both in age and in those running for office, are committed to these lies. It is a movement built on, as some say, cap, or a falsehood. A party organized around election lies, science lies, QAnon lies. That's cap. And how should America deal with all this cap? Well, we're joined now by the political strategist quoted earlier, Che Komanduri. Welcome back, sir.
It's good to be back, Ari. How are you?
I'm good. We quoted you because you make a generational point, that the Republican leaders are only mad because this freshman, who many people may not have heard of, was lying about them. They don't care about lying about the other things. And this cap-fueled, lie-fueled party, though, is what they raised their next generation to be.
Yeah, it should really give us a lot of cause to pause and really worry about the next generation of American politicians, because Madison Cawthorn is the first Republican to wholly come of age in the Palin-Trump era. The only Republican world he really knows is a Palin-Trump Republican world. It is a world that is a post-truth world. It is a world that is very much obsessed with celebrity, as we talked about before, that is post-policy, that really believes in a type of clickbait politics and reality show politics. And we really should understand, we've talked before about George Wallace and Pat Buchanan, who are Trump's predecessors, in terms of white grievance politics. It was Sarah Palin who really introduced this whole idea of clickbait politics. That really wasn't part of Pat Buchanan or George Wallace's world. This idea of trying to be a reality show star. Sarah Palin was actually on a reality show. She was really the first major politician I can think of who was much more at home on the set of Duck Dynasty than she was in a congressional budget committee. She was somebody who presented her family as a blue-collar version of the Kardashians. And Trump obviously took this to another level. He actually had his whole presidency as a type of reality show, as a type of TV entertainment. You know, there were cliffhangers, there were guest stars, there were surprise reveals, there were plot twists. There were all these elements that Trump very much sort of geared his presidency around. And this is all Madison Cawthorn really knows. So it shouldn't come as a surprise to us that he sort of pretends to be this character out of House of Cards fighting DC decadence, because that is kind of exactly who he's seen himself as being. And that's what he's been taught being a politician is all about.
So he learned from them, but then when he defames Republican leaders with the talk we showed earlier, is he just not as skilled at this dark art?
Well, he is very skilled in terms of presenting himself in a certain way. What he didn't understand were the lines. You know, you can accuse Democrats of any sorts of things. If he said, oh, Democrats had invited me to these sorts of parties, Democrats had done drugs in front of me, I think that would have been treated very differently than when you're accusing members of your own party of that exact behavior, members of your own party that you're working with every single day. He didn't understand where the lines were. You know, Josh Hawley understands where the lines are. He understands you can get away with basically accusing Judge Jackson of being friendly to pedophilia. Ted Cruz understands where the lines are. He understands you can accuse Judge Jackson of trying to create racist babies or whatever he was accusing her of trying to do. But Cawthorn didn't understand that the line was very clear. You attack the other side, you don't attack your own side unless your last name is Trump.